Hey now, everybody. Welcome to Englet.org. This is Professor Island, and today we are talking about plague and pestilence. The notion of a plague or some kind of disease that wipes out a large chunk of humanity is actually a pretty old story, and certainly we even have remnants of this in religious texts, including the Bible, which, of course, the famous 10 plagues brought upon Egypt. Some of them were animal oriented, and we discussed that in a different discussion about the animals strike back kind of thing. But we also had the plague itself, a pestilence that came down and struck down the firstborn. And this notion of a disease that affects either a select number of people or a wide range of people and only a select number are chosen is a theme that runs through a lot of horror fiction, not only because we have an opportunity to examine the effects of the plague itself, or whatever this happens to be. We can call it a pestilence or a plague when we talk about a widespread affliction, but also the effect on human beings and how they respond to each other. And certainly historically we've had this in various ways. We had various flus and things that have gone through society. And of course the most famous probably would be the bubonic plague and its effect on Europe and the world. And then, of course, when we have other things like Ebola or AIDS or something like that that affects people, creates a fear, and then creates subclasses of people who are either thought to have it or thought to carry it or thought to have been causing it. We have all kinds of interesting things that happen in society, and some of them are actually quite horrific. In terms of literature, of course, we can go, straight to the master, back to Edgar Allan Poe, and his story of Masque of the Red Death, in which we have a very Black Plague kind of story in which people are engaging in debauchery and kind of have isolated themselves from what they think is the source of the plague, and they're throwing a huge party. This is actually a reflection of a lot of what came out of the original bubonic plague, in which many people thought that this was a pestilence sent down by God to punish people for their revelry, and there was a huge resurgence in not only religion but self-punishing religion. We get the flagellates and the folks who are going to find that the more they suffer on earth, the more likely they are to end up into the kingdom of heaven. And the idea is that God is striking down with this plague the undeserving, and therefore, if you catch the disease, it is a mark from God that you are somehow evil. In Masque of the Red Death, the author uses it more with a bit of irony to note that these people's arrogance in terms of offering this kind of masquerade has allowed actually the carrier of death and death itself to come in and ravage the population within the party. Later on, we get other stories, and certainly Albert Camus' story of the plague is rooted in his existentialist roots, in which he's examining the plague not only in the context of an actual plague, but also in the context of the world in which he lives, in which we have a very authoritarian government and a very paranoid society, as well as in a paranoid government, and his examining of the way that human beings treat each other, and of course the nature of existence itself. Certainly, as with most of his stories, the root of the unknown aspect of this conflict is what drives the story. And of course, Camus is trying as much as possible to examine psychologically what's going on within the character, and of course what goes on within society. Stephen King used the same concept of this worldwide plague, not only in an early version of the Stan story called Night Surf, but in obviously the much larger version for this book. And the idea was that the world is decimated down to 10% of its original population by something caused by the government, and that's a Kingian notion. That's definitely something that he likes. It's the same thing for The Mist, which is another short story, and it's always an accident over at the military plant. It's always an accident over at some place where people were doing things they should not have done, and something got out of hand, and then we are all doomed. This actually fits into a notion and a belief by many people that certain diseases, including Ebola and AIDS and other types of diseases, were actually created or caused by human error, and then kind of propagated in that particular way. And in some ways, we are hoist on our own petard, as it were. And certainly, The Stand is kind of engaging this notion: if we were to strip down the earth down to just a few people, and they chose sides, two very clear sides, what would happen as they battle each other? And his examination of that, including the notion of having the Randall Flagg side, the walking dude side, end up in Vegas of all places, of course, Sin City, and then we have the other group in Colorado. I'm not sure why he chose there, but that notion that we have these mystical aspects battling each other through, of course, human beings is kind of a reflection of both the religious context in which he's seen this, but also the psychological aspect as he goes through each of his multiple characters and how they respond to joining one side or the other of this conflict. When we get to movies, of course, we can't discuss a plague without discussing zombies, and we want to go to the godfather of the zombie movies and the zombie genre, which is George Romero, and his discussion of the plague, in this case, zombies. And again, we have an careful examination of what happens to human beings when they are beset by an outside force, and how much they battle each other in the storyline. And certainly, when your main protagonist is already deemed by society to be an untrustworthy or a second-class citizen, or both, in the case of our African-American male protagonist, we have these things where he is battling not only the outside force of these zombies, and he's clearly the only person who really understands how to live in a hostile world and to survive it, and you have all these other people who are battling him and relying on him to save them at the same time. And of course, the irony is not lost and on the observer, especially at the end. And this is Romero examining that the plagues that we are concerned about might be ones that we live with every day, like racism and sexism and the like. And then later on, when we get to the 1960s and 70s, and we get to more mainstream movies, we had the idea that basically our plague was going to come from space, and certainly Aliens runs down this gamut of this invading species that's going to attack everyone. But certainly the Andromeda strain was this notion in which we have some kind of malady that is affecting human beings, and we're trying to figure out what's going to keep us alive. And it's this examination of this kind of specialty. And there are other movies in which special individuals seem to be immune to some kind of disease, and then they become either targets by one group, or they become raised and praised and idolized by another group. Later on, of course, we get to Legend, which is a work that was written by Matheson, and the idea is that I Am Legend, actually, and by Matheson, and of course it's part of his analysis of, again, a post-apocalyptic world in which we don't really have much left, and the notion of who survives and what makes an individual stand above the crowd, and this idea that we have certain powers perhaps innate in us, or that perhaps it has to do with this special person who rises above this. Remember that your plague story, just like your Wild Animals Gone Wild story or any other kind of theme, very often comes right back to, either from a Marxist perspective, your author examining the nature of human nature by stripping away the vast majority of the population and creating an outside force that they must battle while they battle each other. And certainly a psychoanalytical criticism of the individual characters and how they respond to these works, and where they end up as being manifestations of their own desires and their own beliefs about themselves. And obviously, we also have these historical contexts in which they're drawing from, and some mythological aspects in which we're drawing from stories that we know over and over and over again, and these very familiar tropes in terms of this isolated character who has to not only battle this big problem, but also battle the little problems of dealing with the people that he comes across during the course of this world. So, anyway, obviously, you can always keep exploring these things through various tropes, and note how these various types of storylines cross over each other, and you certainly will have more than one storyline in any complex work. You can always contact me at englandguy@earthling.net if you have any questions or comments or fashion tips, and otherwise, stay in touch.